Good afternoon. Calling together this, what is it called? It's a special workshop open meeting. We've invited all the electric utilities in to do a presentation on broadly on resource adequacy in the short term. We have an agenda that was posted, so I'll work through the agenda. So starting with a roll call. So Judith Emer could help us with that.
Commissioner O'Connell.
Present.
Commissioner Ellison.
Present.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Present.
Yes, we have 3 commissioners present and we have a quorum.
And then as custom, we'll stand and do pledge of allegiance, state pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And then the state flag of Mexico. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico. See a symbol of perfect friendship among the united cultures. Thank you. So next item is approval of the agenda. Agenda is pretty straightforward, but commissioners, if you have any revisions or changes you want to make to the agenda, now's the time.
I have no revisions.
Nothing for me either.
Great. So seeing no dissent, the agenda is approved. Okay, so now we're in the meat of it. We're going to start a workshop. We were set up on Zoom so people can participate or listen in. We also have quite a few folks here in the room with us today. So broadly, what's on the agenda is we'll start with an introduction overview by commissioners, then allow each utility to introduce themselves. If there are any stakeholders present that would like to be identified or intending to participate by maybe joining in the discussion that follows, you can identify yourself, and then we'll get into the updates by utilities. So one item that is not mentioned on the agenda is what order the utilities will be presenting in. So anyway, I had a proposal that maybe we'll do SPS first, and then El Paso, and then PNM. So I was just throwing that out there for conversation. Commissioners, you got any druthers or would prefer a different order?
That sounds like a good suggestion to me. So
I'm fine.
Okay, so I'll move that the order of the presentations will be SPS, then El Paso, then PNM.
Is there a second?
I second.
I'll take a vote. Commissioner O'Connell.
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison.
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
aye.
The agenda as amended is approved with the order of the presentations.
Great. So then, I've given my overview of what I hope to get out of today is we have presentations and we've seen them. The utilities have presented the slides. So what I found was, frankly, what I was hoping for when we asked the utilities to come in, knowing that each of our 3 regulated utilities are very different in service territory, generation mix, how they provide that mix, and the service really came through to me in the presentation. So anyway, I'm expecting today we'll do a good job of just setting a baseline of where everybody's at, provide a foundation for questions and moving forward together. And then again, I'm Pat O'Connell. So turn it over to Commissioner Ellison if you've got any overview statements you want to make.
I might just comment that, I'm aware that the utilities are are having an ongoing dialogue with the utility division here at the PRC with some regular reporting and discussions. And I think our intent here was really to have something that's a little more interactive, to give us the opportunity to pose some questions and to understand, just where everyone's at in terms of planning for summertime this year and next year. So appreciate your efforts in doing these presentations and in your being here today.
Thank you. Commissioner Aguilar, do you have any overview you'd like to?
I'll just echo the comments that you have already made. I appreciate the utilities preparing the presentations and written responses to our questions. So I look forward to just learning more. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next item is utility introduction. I'll save the overview for when you're giving your presentation, but I guess just get a sense of who's with us here in the room. We could go in the order of presentation. So if the folks from SPS maybe could stand up and say your names.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. Bert Trammell with SPS. With me today, presenting is Ben Elsey, our Director of Resource Planning for SPS. Also included Zoe Peace, who's most recently appointed as Regional Vice President of Regulatory Policy for SPS, previously of General Counsel. Mike D'Antonio is here as well. I think you all know Mike, also in our regulatory group. I think. Oh, there he is.
Great, thank you. And Phil, could you help us with turning that monitor so people in the room can see it? We can see the people in the room. Okay, so next up is El Paso.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. I'm Jim Sheestone, Vice President of Regulatory Policy Affairs for El Paso, and with me are Nancy Burns, our Deputy General Counsel, Jesse Gonzalez, who is our Manager of Energy Marketing, and Victor Martinez, who's our Manager of Resource Planning. These gentlemen will be going through the presentation materials and answering questions. We also have on remotely our Director of Load and Rate Research, George Novella, to sort of cover any questions on the load forecast side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark Fenton, I'm the Executive Director of Regulatory Policy and Case Management at PNM, as you all know. With me today, I have Nick Phillips. He's our Director of Integrated Resource Planning. Brent Heffington, he's our Manager of Generation. He's responsible for the wholesale power marketing group, generation engineering, and our generation in general. I also have Sarah Baxley in the room with me. She's a resource analyst working in the next direction in the IRP. And on the line, we have Tom Falgren. He's our principal generation advisor. Some of you may have remembered him as the Vice President of Generation. He's in a different role now. And we've also got, I guess he's not on the line, but Steve Schwepke is our resource advocate. Steve, yes, Steve Schwepke, he's our case manager that works under my direction in case management. So Nick will be doing the bulk of our presentation. I'll be making some remarks at the beginning as well.
Thank you. Then I don't know if we have any, but you self-identifies as a stakeholder. You're on in the meeting or online. I guess if you're online, you can go ahead and use the raise hand feature on Zoom. Seeing a lot of PRC staff folks are with us today, which is great. Okay, so seeing no stakeholders for introduction, I think we can move to the utility update. So next item is about 20-minute presentation talking through what's going on this summer, next summer, and the following summer. And so I think Brooke and Ben from SPS are coming in, just be sure you got your green on. The mic doesn't work. And then this is a 3-camera sitcom, so there's the camera in here.
All right, well, good afternoon again. Thank you for having us. As I mentioned, Brooke Trammell, Regional Vice President, Regulatory and Pricing for SPS. With me today, it's Ben Elsey. He's our Director of Resource Planning for SPS. Both of us have quite a bit of experience with SPS in our system, but have worked, within the Xcel Energy family for a number of years. So Ben also has familiarity with some of our resource planning processes and functions in our other operating companies. And so to the extent you have questions about other things that we are seeing as a company from a resource planning perspective, I trust Ben can answer some of those questions as well. We do have hard copies of our slides that were filed earlier. I assume, commissioners, you have a version of that at your disposal.
Yeah, electronic.
Perfect.
We have
Yeah.
an electronic version used.
Okay, I think we managed to get slide numbers on all the pages, so I'll refer to them by number and we can just flip through together. On slide 3, we included just a quick overview of our New Mexico service territory. As everyone knows, we primarily serve the Texas Panhandle and South Plains region, and then in New Mexico, primarily eastern and southeastern New Mexico, have a different customer concentration with a lot of C&I load on our system, but also just given our footprint, have an interesting resource profile as well when it comes to wind integration over the years on our system, as well as solar resource capacity, particularly in our southeastern service territory. But we serve about 125,000 customers in New Mexico, 16 towns. And so slide 3 just has a little bit of an outline of our service territory, so you can see where our customers are. And later on, we have a slide that shows approximate locations of our generation resources. There we go. So if you scroll down to slide 4, as we'll touch on some of the facts that are influencing our capacity position, it's
Just to catch up on what's online, the one you're talking about, the title Southwest Power Pool members.
correct. Thank you. Yep. Slide 4. As I was saying, as we think about SPS's changing capacity position and things that influence our resource planning considerations, but also our resource adequacy requirements, we also have the added layer of RTO membership. And as participants in the Southwest Power Pool, we rely heavily and are integrated heavily through some of those processes with respect to transmission planning, but also particularly market operations as a market participant in the SPP integrated marketplace. And for most relevant to today's discussion, the SPP also sets resource adequacy requirements for its load serving entities in the pool. And so today we'll touch on some of the policy changes that are being discussed at the SPP, some that have already been implemented that have certainly changed our capacity position in the near term. And Chairman, even since we made our last presentation at the Resource Adequacy Workshop last July. So slide 5 is a kind of a continuation of information related to the SPP integrated marketplace, just general information there. On the map, you can see some of the other ISOs and RTOs in the country, but generally SPP has about a 14-state footprint. I think technically it actually goes over the Canadian border to the north, but when we think about resource adequacy requirements from a policy perspective in the Southwest Power Pool, we're talking about tariff provisions and planning requirements that are applicable to the entire pool, of which, of course, SPS is a member in really the far southern portion, not only of the eastern interconnection, but in the southernmost portion of the pool. And then, of course, our service territory is quite far south into that region as well, tucked right in between essentially ERCOT to the east and west to the west. So slide, let's see, 6. Don't see, I lost the number on that one. This is essentially a snapshot of some of the information we provided in the handout in the July workshop. Shows our capacity overview by resource type from an existing generation standpoint. The map is a little illustrative in terms of the location of our facilities, but it gives you kind of a feel for where our technology sits in the diversity of our resources by technology type across our service territory. And as Ben will get into more details in some of the next slides, we'll talk about some of the age of these resources. So generally, Our coal and gas steam fleet is aging, where we have some newer renewable resources that have come online more recently. And then like our Jones unit north of Lubbock is a relatively new addition to the system in the grand scheme of our multi-decade fleet that we've been maintaining. I would just note on the table here on slide 6, the nameplate capacity does differ, of course, from the accredited capacity of resources on our system. From an accredited capacity standpoint, we see less accreditation of the wind and solar compared to our fully dispatchable fossil units. And as Ben will discuss in more detail in later slides and topics around SPP resource adequacy planning requirements, that accreditation is somewhat a moving target in SPP policy right now and currently. Commissioner Ellison?
Is that a effective load carrying capacity, that accredited capacity?
Are these your deals?
Yeah, so for wind and solar, the numbers shown on this slide are based on ELCC. So, excuse me, effective load carrying capability values calculated by SPP. Just keeping in mind that FERC recently rejected SPP's request to use ELCC. So this is completely up in the air at the moment.
So any questions on this slide in terms of location of resources or existing fleet and capacity before we move on into some of the policy considerations?
So just broadly, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but is the system's joint dispatch between New Mexico and Texas?
It's system dispatch.
System
So when you
dispatch.
say joint, I think of two, but really we run it as one system.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a better way to state it than my question. And then roughly what's the percent mix of energy Mexico versus Texas?
On an energy basis.
On an energy basis, I believe New Mexico is probably around 40.
Okay. And then which are the steamers on your gas fleet?
Can you identify?
Yeah,
the
so the gas steam generation, just seeing if it's on the key, it's not. I'll start from the top of the map, so from the north side and work down. So Harrington is currently coal, will be converted to gas steam at the end of 2024. Plant X is 4 gas steam units, Plant X 1, 2, 3, and 4. At Jones Station, there are 2 steam turbines there and 2 combustion turbines. So Jones 1 and 2 are steamers, 3 and 4 are Siemens 5000F CTs. Moving to the west, Maddox again is 1 steam generator, 2 CTs. Cunningham Station is 2 steam turbines and 2 CTs. And then Hobbs, which is a long-term purchase power, is a combined cycle generator.
Thank you.
Your load, is it primarily in the New Mexico Permian area, or how is it distributed?
I'll say roughly. We definitely have the population centers of Amarillo and Plainview in the Panhandle and South Plains region, but from a commercial load perspective, while we do have commercial load in the northern Panhandle, where a lot of our wind generation is, as you can see, primarily our oil and gas load is in the southernmost portion of our service territory. There's certainly a lot in southeastern New Mexico, but the lower part of our service territory in Texas is heavy oil and gas load as well. Anything you'd add, Ben?
No, I think you covered it. Maybe just add that, just for reference, SPS is a 4,000 megawatt summer peaking utility, and we're currently carrying a 15% plan reserve margin. So with the PRM, that's 4,600 megawatts of a capacity need.
So more relevant to today's workshop is, what does the near-term capacity position look like? Here, we understood the commission's most interested in hearing updates on our 23, 24, and 25 position. It's quite timely for SPS, given some of the resource adequacy policy considerations that have changed and continue to be a conversation in the Southwest Power Pool. We also continue to see increased load requests on our system. And then we have an aging fleet with planned generation unit retirements in the coming years. We've had some units retire in recent years that have been discussed before the commission in prior IRP proceedings and rate proceedings. But Ben will give us an overview of some of the additional, mostly gas units that'll be retiring in 23, 24, just to give a frame of mind of the magnitude of generation retirements we have in this time frame, and discuss a bit of our increased load requirements, and then also the complexities, again, that are coming from the resource adequacy requirements. That relates to increased planning reserve margins, ELCC accreditation policies, as well as consideration of things like performance-based accreditation and different evaluations the SPP will have on the performance of units when assessing its accreditation values. And in fact, given again that 14-state footprint of the SPP, considerations to a winter potentially planning reserve margin. So Ben, I'll turn it over to you. You can fill in the blanks there and then take us into slide 9.
Sure. So on slide 9, we have our loads and resources table. From left to right, we have just kind of a description of our resource type. In the column 2023, that will be our summer 23 position, 23 through 24 will be our winter position, and so on and so on. Unfortunately, we didn't put line items on this table, which may have made it a little bit easier. But if you can just kind of come down to the darkest line with the title position, and if you look under position, you will see our long and short position from a capacity need. So for example, in the summer of 2023, we are 718 megawatts long. In other words, we have 718 megawatts more capacity than we need to meet our peak load plus our 15% PRM.
I would just add a little context for the commission's benefit. You know, we have had changes from a capacity need standpoint on our system as our wholesale production customers have exited our system. Generally, we've had bilateral contracts where wholesale customers have taken production service from us. Those ramp downs, as we often refer to them, have been occurring over several years. So as our wholesale ramp downs have occurred, that has opened up a bit of generation capacity for our retail load growth to grow into. The wholesale ramp down occurring in 2023 is the remaining load of Lubbock, the city of Lubbock, Light and Power and Light. Sorry, I got that backwards. They had a request before the Texas Commission for approval of their final load transfer to ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, just for administrative notice that a commission did approve that transfer last week at their open meeting. So we do anticipate that Lubbock's load will transfer later this summer to ERCOT and would no longer be a production capacity customer of SPS. So just wanted to give some context of some of the length that you may have seen over time on SPS's system as the wholesale customers leave our system.
Again, in terms of the wholesale ramp down, is it because of customers joining ERCOT, or what is the primary driver of that?
It's a series of essentially negotiated cases, both at the New Mexico Commission and in Texas, as well as FERC. So essentially, we in the 2004-2005 timeframe, through a series of those complaints and commission proceedings, agreed to exit our wholesale business, and that preserved the retail benefit of generation capacity. These customers.
So the folk that you're talking about, not your retail sales, but your wholesale sales, and that you're having to exit that.
That's
business. Correct. Okay.
And those 2004-2005 proceedings established generally the schedules for those contract reductions and ultimate contract exits, and also incorporated some customers moving to partial requirement service, for example, over time. Now, I would say from a wholesale perspective, many of these production customers, whether it's a municipality or the New Mexico co-ops, for example, they often maintain transmission service with us, so they still may be a transmission customer. From a wholesale perspective on our system, they're just not taking power.
So yeah, just to continue on, so 718 megawatts long for the summer of 2023, and currently showing almost 1,200 megawatts long in the winter for 23-24. That's primarily just because we have a much lower load on the system in the winter. The one thing Brooke alluded to earlier is certainly in the wake of Winter Storm Uri, in Winter Storm Elliott, there's definitely a push within the Southwest Power Pool for a more robust winter requirement. So right now we have an obligation to meet our planning reserve margin requirement in the winter, but there's no financial penalties like there are in the summer. That's almost certainly going to change in the next 2 to 3 years with SPP, where we'll have a full winter resource adequacy requirement in the winter. There's a potential that the winter may actually become a more of a focus point for us because the PRM is currently consistent across summer and winter. There's talk about the winter PRM potentially being much, much greater than the summer PRM. So we could see, for example, a 25% in the winter, which would then shift the focus more to winter than it would to summer, especially as we see a transition to maybe more solar resources, obviously only providing capacity in the summer, net of renewables, you concentrate more on the winter. As we shift to the columns to the right, our capacity position by 2024 reduces to 336 megawatts long. There's 2 main drivers for that. One is the additional load growth Brooks alluded to. The other reason is the retirement of some aging gas steam units. So on the top line, which is owned thermal resources, you will start seeing, actually it's actually a PPA in 23 to 24. You actually see some of our older units coming off the system. So we have an expiring PPA, which is the Blackhawk PPA, is currently expiring in 2024. And then after that, we have some gas steam units that were built in the 1950s. So they're 70 years old, that are due to retire in the next few years.
And I just noticed on the screen, we're on slide 7. I think Ben's reading off slide 9. Didn't know Commissioner Aguilera could see that. We gotta go.
And on this,
I got it. Thank you.
and on this loads and resources table, we actually have 2 positions. So if you now cast your eye to the very bottom row, this assumes some additional large load requests coming online. So as many people in this room have probably heard, we're talking a lot of data centers, some of these more clean fuel groups, hydrogen productions, some very, very large load requests, several hundred megawatts that would come online, in one go. So we've actually got an alternative capacity position that shows if one of these customers was come onto our system. And what we actually see is as early as the summer of 2024, we could potentially be very short on resources. So
I would just add, so we're looking at the very bottom of the chart here on slide 9, where Ben's added lines for potential additional load, just to give a little extra context for, say, the 320 megawatts of additional load we could see in 2024. These are customers who work through an interconnection process through the SPP. So they submit, particularly for load requests of this size, they do submit the request, and there's a study process with the SPP. So while speculative, there is a higher probability, I would say, for some of this load, given the commitments of customers to enter into these study processes. There's financial commitments that the customers make to go through these processes with SPP. And as Ben mentioned, a lot of the resource needs that we see are driven by these potential requests that are not, 5-10 megawatt additions. These are several hundred megawatts, some even requesting service, depending on the interconnection, at the 1,000 or 2,000 megawatt level.
And I think really that's the takeaway from this slide is while we're long today going into the summer of 2023, we're facing increased uncertainty, both from a load planning perspective, from a resource perspective. We're also seeing, the ELCC numbers coming into effect. SPP are also introducing performance-based accreditation, where thermal resources capacity accreditation will be discounted based on their forced outage rate or their historical forced outage rate. So there's uncertainty on resource accreditation as well as load. And then also SPP, there's an increasing uncertainty with resource adequacy requirements, the potential for further PRM increases, a much greater focus on winter planning. So when you add all this together, yes, we sit long going into the summer of 2023, but from our perspective, we're already planning for 24 and 25 and trying to get resources in the pipeline to replace, these aging gas steam units. Before I move on from this slide, is there any questions on the short-term position?
And I was just going to add, along those lines, on slide 10, we have the requested 23 through 31 summer LNR table. But as Ben just mentioned, given the change in our capacity position that we expect over this forecast horizon, as you can see here in the resource position line, we do forecast a resource need in the 26 and 27 timeframe. We have issued a request for proposals for capacity to be online by 2027. We have a slide where we can talk to that in more detail later, but I just wanted to note that it was a bullet on the previous slide. You can see that need represented on the slide 10, Eleanor, and we're happy to take any questions on the RFP status later in the presentation, and would just ask that the commission understand there's certain information we can't provide, non-public information that we don't wish to share at this workshop, but certainly try to be helpful with the information we can provide publicly.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you. And again, you've provided that information in a narrative that comes along with this PowerPoint. So if folks haven't seen that yet, it's out there. EDOC.
So we've talked about our short-term capacity position being as early as 2024, maybe 2026, sometime in that frame. As we go to the mid to late 20s, we have a growing capacity need. You see that on the slide here. Obviously, a lot of this is driven by the proposed Hope retirement at the end of 2028, which is 1,069 megawatts. But that's not the only driving factor because of this capacity need. It's also driven by the large load growth, and then also continued retirements of gas steam generators through the late 20s. Any questions on this slide before I move on?
Well, thank you.
So now I'm going to move on to some of the requested slides. We were asked to show kind of our resource types going into 23 through 25. We felt the best way of representing that, since we're not proposing any new resources in that time frame, was to show you our resource types in the last historical year. So this is 2022, which would probably be very reflective of 23, 24, and 25. As a member of SPP, it's difficult to show you a resource stack per se. The SPP dispatched the entire footprint with SPS included. We are also, a very large wind generator. So wind is usually bottom or top of the stack, depending on how you look at the first resource that's dispatched. And then what we see is our resources then following wind generation. So what we tend to see on this map is we have, at the moment, 190 megawatts AC of solar on the system. And you'll see that as that kind of orangey beige line at the very bottom. And then you'll see the wind is the second major issue there. And the wind is obviously very intermittent, up and down, depending obviously on wind during the given month. What we see then is our cogeneration. Our cogeneration tends to ramp up more in the summer. There's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, the increased load demand in the summer. And also until recently, we were restricting the toke units to only operate over the summer months to conserve water. As we go up through the stack, we then get onto what was traditionally our intermittent resources, or our intermediate resources. We see our gas combined cycle there, the PPA I mentioned earlier. That's also our largest unit. So that's 558 megawatts. Technically, it's 3 units. It's one plant. It's a 2-on-1 combined cycle. Then our green, which is our gas steam generation, which continues to fill in those voids when the wind generation slows down. And then at the very top is our newest units, which is our gas CT units. So I mentioned earlier that includes Jones 3 and Jones 4, which were in service in 2011 and 2013, respectively.
So it looks like you're a net seller on peak in the summer and a purchaser in the shoulder months.
Yes, in this given year, it can vary. If you look in November, for example, when we were a net purchaser, the wind profile during that time was extremely low. So if we had seen a peak maybe in the evening instead of an early morning peak, we would probably have much greater wind generation. We could potentially be selling into the market.
Thank you.
Again, when we move on to the resource stack, this is kind of an antiquated way of, in some respects, of looking at generation now. The days of baseload co-generation, intermediate, combined cycle generation, peaking generation is probably over for companies within a balancing authority or an SPP. What we show here, though, is our renewable generation at the bottom of the stack, obviously having zero variable cost or zero production cost. Our cogeneration at the moment is our lower cost generation based on today's gas prices. If you went back to 2019, the cogeneration had been slightly higher in the stack just because gas prices were so low. But cogeneration typically being $2, 10 heat rate, $20 a megawatt hour. We then go into our combined cycle generation, you know, our efficient generation, something with a 6 to 7 heat rate. And then some of our less efficient generation, some of that gas steam generation, anywhere from a 11 to a 14 heat rate. Some of this built, as I said earlier, as early as the 1950s. This is generally being dispatched again as the wind drops, as gas prices were extremely low in 2019 and 2020. And then at the top of the stack are quick ramping, fast starting CTs, again, mainly picking up those lows in wind generation. Did you have some?
Well, you said picking up the loads and following the wind. So I just wanted to touch on one more thing. You know, you think about our system and some of these resources being built in the 50s and 60s. You know, they are being operated differently than they were designed and constructed. With SPP dispatching the system, generally, and Ben can correct me if I get this wrong, but generally the load serving entities are required to bid in all of our load requirements with owned generation or acquired generation under PPA. So essentially we have to cover our load obligations in the day ahead market 100%. In real time, we have to cover 90% of our load with our own resources in the market. So as SPP is dispatching our system and the entire balancing area, the entire 14 state footprint, you know, we do see the operations of our units materially change. So units like our coal units that were built as baseload units, you know, to run very consistently, have seen tremendous increases in their number of starts every year, not only as we follow the wind, but just follow that SPP integrated marketplace dispatch. So if you kind of think about what ramps up and down in this stack, you know, it's not just the top blue, green, and yellow that's starting and stopping far more frequently than it used to. We're dipping into that gray coal resource for load following capabilities. True?
That's absolutely true. And one thing I may add to Brooke's point is our operations team have done a lot of work over the last 5 years or so. So our co-units, the minimum operation of our co-units now for TOPE, which are 540 megawatt units maximum generation, can now go down as low as 125 megawatts. So they've really done a lot of work in tuning those units in order to be able to bring them down as the wind ramps up, and then also bring them back up, obviously, as the wind comes down. To Brooke's point, not necessarily what they were designed to do, but certainly some improvements our operations fleet has made.
The gas steam units, you know, they don't sound very competitive. Is SPP dispatching those mainly due to transmission constraints?
So there's a couple of reasons the gas steam units were dispatched frequently, was mainly because of low natural gas prices. In 2019, 2020, natural gas prices in the Permian even went negative. So they were paying for us to burn gas. So then efficiency really goes out the window when you're dealing with very, very low natural gas prices. The other reason is obviously the entire SPP footprint is very heavily wind dependent. So, you know, in those areas of very low wind production, you are just seeing your firm and dispatchable generation being dispatched more, regardless of necessarily the inefficient heat rate.
Yeah. And from a policy perspective, when we think about the instance where SPS may experience negative gas prices and essentially be paid to run some of these gas units, that is a function of what we refer to as trapped gas in this part of the country. So think about the gas processing facilities in and around our service territory. Often gas produced in that area can't be transported out of the area. So we may see higher volatility in natural gas pricing in other parts of the country, but we still may see the phenomenon of trapped gas in the Permian, and that does influence the fuel supply to our units in that area.
That would be because of the gas pipeline constraints, the local gas pipeline constraints.
Correct.
On the right-hand stack, as the commissioner correctly pointed out earlier, we were actually a net seller in July of last year. So if we were to have lost our largest plant, our combined cycle plant at Hobbs, we would have still had enough self-generation to cover our load. I would just point out, obviously, that's very much a factor based on wind production at the time. So if we didn't have enough generation to meet our load, we would tend to rely more heavily on the SPP, footprint. So we would then become a net purchaser.
Any questions? I know we kind of went through the 23, 24, 25 timeframe there with the scenario that was requested. We can provide an update on our RFP again, which is really seeking capacity resources in the 26, 27 timeframe.
Yeah, I appreciate the speed and the level at which you're moving.
Okay, well, just quickly then, because we can't share quite as much detail on the RFP. We did issue the RFP in November of 2022. Bids were received at the end of February. Again, this was a solicitation for resources to be online in the 2026-27 timeframe based on the forecasted capacity need we see in that in those years. I'll let Ben talk about a little bit of what we've seen in response to that RFP. Again, with the caveat that obviously the developers want to maintain the confidentiality of their bids while they're being evaluated. Any resources selected out of this RFP process would be brought before the commission for consideration, either through a PPA pre-approval filing, if we enter into a PPA acquisition, or if it's a company-owned project through a generation CCN filing. So just recognizing that there would be more regulatory process around review of these projects, but this is where we're at in the solicitation process right now, the bid evaluation stage. Ben?
Yeah, so as Brooke alluded to, we had the results of our RFP came in on February the 28th, so 2 weeks ago. Still very, very early days of just reviewing the proposal. So we're not quite at the stage where we can release price information. But we received proposals from 10 separate bidders for approximately 40 different proposals. The vast majority of those proposals were renewable generation. So it was a combination of either solar resources, wind resources, battery energy storage, or a combination of the three. So there were several bidders who, for example, would have proposed wind and battery or solar and battery. We also received a couple of bids that were more emerging technologies, hydrogen-based technologies, for example, which we're still reviewing. So early days on the RFP yet, but a fairly robust response. Again, with a relatively narrow time frame, looking for resources to come online through 24 through 27 in order to fill our capacity need.
You obviously can purchase power from other parts of SPP. Your focus seems to be on self-supply and not relying on that. Can you explain that?
So at a high level, again, as a load serving entity in the SPP, we do have the obligation to have enough acquired generation to meet our load plus the planning reserve margin requirement. In real time, that can vary a little bit given the SPP dispatch, but from a resource acquisition standpoint, we do have to self-supply, if you will, and meet those requirements. In terms of being able to shop in the SPP these days, I'd say it's a lot harder. Certainly the SPP integrated marketplace is going to balance the load and needs in real time. But if you think about being able to acquire additional capacity resources, even short-term purchases, with the increased planning reserve margin requirements and resource adequacy requirements in the SPP for the entire footprint, everyone is facing heightened resource adequacy pressures. So every load serving entity in the pool is holding their capacity a little tighter than maybe we've seen them hold it in the past, and has made pretty significant impacts to the amount of available capacity for all entities in the SPP to sell or buy. Anything you would add, Ben?
No, I just mentioned earlier, there's definitely going to be enhanced resource adequacy requirements coming out of the SPP. So with that increased uncertainty for performance-based accreditation, ELCC, you're starting to see exactly what Brooke said, is people aren't willing to give up their capacity. They're trying to stay, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts long going into 24 and 25 to make sure they don't find themselves short and have to meet a deficiency payment that would far exceed any revenue they could potentially earn.
Excuse me, I have a quick question. It sounds like it was an all resource RFP, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And when do you anticipate the procurement process being completed?
So maybe I'll take it from my perspective and you can do it. Yeah. So as I said, the bids came in maybe 2 weeks ago. We've got through our initial review and made sure that the bids are what we call complete. They submitted all the paperwork they had to submit. We're now going through and sending these proposals to our subject matter experts, and they opine on the quality of the bid. We expect that to maybe take 30 days. And then we would advance the projects to computer modeling, and that would take probably another 30 days. So we're hoping within maybe 60 days, we would have selected a portfolio of resources. And then obviously the fun part of going to the regulatory side.
We do have an independent evaluator that was engaged that is overseeing the bid evaluation process and oversaw the solicitation. So consistent with the commission's revised IRP rules, we typically have done that in the past and done that with other Xcel Energy operating companies, but we did engage an IE for this solicitation as well. Not sure how we did on time, but we got the nod, so we will go to Brett.
And just in the spirit of what we're doing today, I appreciate the presentation and we set a 20-minute target, but we'll be here as long as it takes, I guess, is the big thing. So anyway, I appreciate it. And then if you can stick around, I think.
I was just wondering if Commissioner Aguilera had any
good
questions.
Just one quick one. Can you just please remind me the role that battery storage plays? I don't recall. You may have talked about it, but I don't recall sort of where it was in like the stack, for example.
So right now we have no battery energy storage on the system at all. As we move forward, SPP will be responsible for dispatching battery energy storage. There's kind of two chains of thought right now. One which would be to preserve the capacity value of a battery. In other words, you try and keep it stored for as long as you can, so it can be dispatched when you need it the most to provide the biggest capacity benefit. I don't think that's going to be the approach SPP take as we start seeing batteries. I think we're really going to start seeing an energy arbitrage play. So what you start seeing is the batteries will be charged during high wind production hours, low cost hours, and then to be dispatched at the times of high energy pricing to really make up for that difference between low and high energy prices. Did I answer your question then?
You did. Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Chairman, Commissioners, for the time today, and thank you for the questions. As always, if there's any other questions after the workshop, we're happy to take those, and we'll participate and listen to the rest of today's discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So next up is EPE, and their slide presentation starts on page 9 of the PDF that we have in Board Effects.
Good afternoon. Good to see you guys again. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this. We know it's very important to the commission. It's very important to EPE. And we have the guys here who do all of this analysis and work. So I'm sure we can answer any questions you might have. We'll present the material that we included in the response, our February 28th response to your questions. That same presentation you've already seen. But certainly have an opportunity to get into detail on any of those slides, the LNR tables, any of the others. And so we'll go that way. I'll give a brief interview and then Victor and Jesse can walk through that presentation. Please stop us for questions, just as you have been. Just briefly, I know you know this, but EPE serves, we're multi-jurisdictional, so we have Texas and New Mexico. New Mexico makes up about 20% of our load and customers. Our customer mix is pretty similar across jurisdictions. Texas is obviously a lot larger and has a little bit more industrial load, but still predominantly residential and small commercial load across the jurisdictions. A little bit more, as I said, large commercial and industrial on the Texas side, but pretty consistent. Our resource mix is substantially nuclear from Palo Verde and natural gas. We are, as you'll see when we get to the slide on our ongoing procurements, we don't have any ongoing RFPs, but we're now moving. We now moved into the procurement phase and have several before the commission for approvals, substantially all solar and battery storage facilities. We completed our last IRP was completed in 21. It was approved by the commission in 20, or accepted by the commission in 21. It includes a 20-year plan, a resource expansion plan, as well as a 4-year action plan. That was also included along with our February 28th filing as an attachment to those responses. Our presentation pretty much tracks the questions in your order. Mr. Martinez will review our loads and resources, our L&R tables in that presentation, and those are largely consistent with our filed IRP. They're updated for current load forecasts and resource expectations. In the 21 IRP, we did quite a few things differently. Victor can talk about that extensively if you have questions on that. But we engaged with E3 to assist us in the modeling when we did our IRP, and so there were some changes there made with respect to now utilizing ELCC and loss of load and some assumptions about loss of load events. And we also, as we went through that process, transitioned to some extent into jurisdictional planning, where previously all of our IRPs had been at the system level. In our 21 IRP, we actually produced a New Mexico jurisdictional L&R table coming out of that IRP, and that's in the presentation and in our filed documents in response to the questions. So we can talk a little bit about that. And it's really that, as you'll see in the slide on new resources, we currently have about 100 megawatts, a little bit over 100 megawatts of solar in our resource portfolio right now. And within the next 3 years, that will go to 700 megawatts of solar, plus a lot of it integrated with storage, battery energy storage. We've got 2 of the new resources on the list that include battery storage in the PPA along with the solar. And so that increase in non-dispatchable resources really required us to make a lot of improvements in our changes in our IRP, and we really appreciated E3's assistance in that. And but all of those resources, some of them dedicated to New Mexico specifically, and some system resources serving both Texas and New Mexico. Our expectation is, especially on the dedicated resource side, we procure those to get us to our RPS requirements as we go through through that process, and expect that we'll get to the 40% requirement by 2025 because of those resources you'll see in that table. A lot of our procurement, as SPS was talking about, maybe not in the same magnitude, but we have old gas steam units that we're retiring. We had the commission approval for an abandonment of 1 unit just a couple of years ago. That unit is now on track to be abandoned after summer of this year. We have 2 other units we'll be filing for abandonment here in New Mexico, probably in May. Other gas units, and so that we have both load growth and replacing that retiring generation. Most of our maybe all of our new gas units in the last 5 years, including a 228 megawatt CT that is coming online in June of this year are combustion turbines. And so that fast response and ramping capability really complements the big increase that we have coming in on the solar side. As I mentioned, with the IRP took into account pretty significant differences, say statutory and regulatory requirements between Texas and New Mexico. We've got the REA on the New Mexico side, and really just, you know, least cost planning continuing in Texas. And so we've been going down this path for some time, where we procure resources to the extent we can on a system basis, and then supplement on the New Mexico side with renewables to satisfy our RPS requirements. Jesse will really address the question in number 6 on our resources and our capability to serve our peak and hypothetical peak in 23 and 24 and 25, and how we would account for a loss of our largest gas unit, which this year will be that new combustion turbine, the 228 megawatt combustion turbine at our Newman Power Station. But we also have the you know, sort of characteristic of our system where we have to bring in that Palo Verde power. And so obviously we rely on transmission to do that. And so really transmission can be a major component, say in a loss of a resource. But we answered the question with respect to the loss of the gas resource. So I'll turn it over to Victor now to go through the presentation. Who's paging through the presentations? Is that you, Judith?
No, it's Patrick in the cloud.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm doing it. So
Okay.
just let me know when to turn the page.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll cue you to advance the presentation. But again, thank you very much. And I'll certainly sit up here and stay here with Victor and Jesse to answer any questions. But these are really the guys who do the bulk of this work. So I'm sure they can cover any of your questions. So please, Victor.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Victor Martinez. I am the manager for the Resource Planning Group for El Paso Electric. And we're happy to be here today to present EPE's Resource Adequacy Plan from 2023 through 2031. So we did have a presentation for you all, but throughout our presentation, if there's any questions you all have, please feel free to stop me. Our goal is at the end of this for you all to have a really clear, concise picture of what our Resource Adequacy Plan looks like. So with that being said, can we move to the next slide, please? So we wanted to start off, I think the first question addressed, please provide EP's loads and resource tables from 2023 through 2031, which we did. El Paso Electric develops its loads and resource tables once a year, and it becomes our official LNR. It's usually developed during the summer timeframe, and it's developed after our loads and resource team develops its long-term energy and demand forecast. So usually that forecast comes out around April of every single year. Once that comes out, we then begin to work to develop this. So we do like to point out that what you are seeing is actually the load and resource developed from last year. So it does include the load forecast that was developed in April. Our loads and resource team should have a new load forecast by next month, and we expect to have a new loads and resource table sometime in the summer. So if you all want, we'd be more than happy to provide that once it's ready. So what I do want to point out is that a loads and resource table was actually developed from the 2021 integrated resource plan that, again, Jim mentioned it was submitted and approved. Now, during that IRP process, there was quite a few changes done in that particular IRP that we hadn't done in the past. So during our presentation, I would like to talk about some of those changes. To start off with is based off of how we handled the multi-jurisdictional. So in the past, we would actually just do resource planning based off of an entire, just based off of the entire resources. We looked at both the demand for New Mexico customers, and we just plan or accordingly make sure we have enough resource to meet that. But obviously, in the last few years, it's been kind of like a divergence between the different jurisdictions that's required different types of generation technologies based on different jurisdictions, which in essence made EP to kind of re-examine the way we do now. So we now are based off our integrated resource plan, based off of a multi-jurisdictional, which we are now procuring resources based off on a jurisdictional basis. So that's one of the things we did change. And that's the reason why today you're able to see two loads in resource. The first one that you see here is for the system. And the reason why we wanted to show the system, because while we are going to be procuring resources based off on a jurisdictional basis, once we have those resources, we will be dispatching based off of the entire system. So which means we'll simply allocate all the resources acquired for both mix and customers, and then we'll use both. There will be some capacity pooling between the two jurisdictions to kind of help us meet that demand. And by doing it this way, we thought that was the best way to meet the jurisdictional needs for every customer at the lowest cost possible. Since there are a lot of synergies between both jurisdictions, we thought this was the best way of doing it. So the first one, it's our system resource. I want to spend a little bit more time on our New Mexico. I figured that's what probably be a little bit more important. But on this one, I just simply want to point out that in years 23 and 24, you do see a deficiency. If you look down on the very bottom on 9.0, which is margin over reserves, we do see a capacity deficiency in years 23 and 24. I do want to point out that, again, because this loads and resource was developed last year, this for years 23, we're actually examining 23 on a planning basis using a planning criteria. Now, EP does measure resource adequacy difference in the year. So for planning, we use a kind of planning criteria. Now, I'll speak a little bit more on that. But on the year, we give it more of an operational criteria, which again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the other slides. So if we can move to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is our New Mexico LNR. What I wanted to do is just spend a little bit of time just to kind of go through it, give kind of a quick summary as to what's in here. I know there's a lot of numbers and a little bit hard to see, but for the most part, we separate our resources into three major buckets. First bucket being EP owned. So that's on section 1, resources, total generation resources. Those are EP owned resources that mainly include gas, nuclear, and some solar as well. The next bucket is our resource purchases, or our long-term purchase power agreements, which right now will entail mostly for solar. So right now, most of our solar is actually coming from purchase power agreements. The next line, future resources, that's actually all future resources that we plan to acquire, either through modeling of the IRP or possibly recent RFPs that we've done, but maybe they haven't had commission approval on there yet. So we don't feel comfortable enough moving them up. But once we get commission approval on some of those, they'll be moving up. And at the bottom, the number 4 is just simply adding up all of the capacity from all those resources. Now, I do want to mention that those capacity that you see here is actually taking the ELCC, or the effective load carrying capability, something that, again, we did change during this IRP. In the past, our generation group would develop an annual basis. They would develop a capacity projection report showing us what each unit, the maximum capacity is of that unit. And those changes by year to year based off either operating characteristics, or maybe there was upgrades down to some of the units or so forth. But it's once a year developed the maximum capacity. So in the past, we would actually use that total capacity projection for our RP, but we noticed that's probably not a good way to measure resource adequacy. So now we do use the ELCC method. So for the first section on, please.
And a quick question on the difference between the total system slide and this New Mexico slide. Are they just a proportion?
Yes,
like a fraction?
Yes, sir.
Is so the same fraction for every resource, or does the fraction change based on which resource you're looking at?
So there are resources that are shared by both jurisdictions. So it'll be 20% on those that are equal. So we have some system resources, and on those system resources, approximately 20% are allocated to New Mexico. Now we do have some system dedicated resources. So there were some resources like solar resource acquired specifically to meet RPS requirements for New Mexico. So those are 100% for New Mexico there. So again, just on our local units, the ELCC, we in essence subtract capacity from the total projection, which in essence, it's we subtract whatever the forced outage rate is of those units, we subtract it, and that's an ELCC. For the renewable generation, it's a little bit more complex. We in essence calculate how much renewable generation is needed in order to help replace a perfect generator. So based off of that, we are able to figure out an ELCC. And right now, for the main years that we'd be looking at for 23 and 25, the ELCC that's projected goes as high as 54% down to 43% in 2025. As you know, the more solar generation we put into our system, the ELCC starts dropping because it's having less contribution to peak on that.
And so you're having up to 54% on your solar for the ELCC, and how much solar will you have as of summer of this year?
Yes, sir. So right now we have 107 megawatts of solar. We plan to have an additional 120 megawatts by this summer. And then next year, we're going to acquire an additional 150, which drops it to about 49%. In 2025, let me see if I can do the math. We have approximately 165, 150 plus 100 megawatts of solar in 2025. So that one will drop it to about 43%.
107 now, correct?
Yes,
107,
about 107 megawatts we have right now.
And we're seeing our peak shift later in the day as all of these resources are added, so that contribution then, their contribution to peak is declining. And that's that reduction in the ELCC.
Yeah.
Do you do production cost modeling to look at on an hour by hour basis what you might expect to see in terms of reliability?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So the ELCC was captured using an 8760 profile. The model recap was used in order to help develop the ELCC for all the units. And that's something that E3 or Energy and Environmental Economics, they are a consultant. They helped us during this phase of our IRP. But yes, it was, we are measuring adequacy, resource adequacy based off of 8760 profile and no longer just off of 1 hour of the year. So next section is just our system demand. We do net out distribute energy and energy efficiency, and we are adding EVs as well now to now give us our total system demand. Now simply taking the delta between the two, we can actually help us calculate what our reserve margin is. Another thing that we did change this year, I apologize, another thing that we did change with our last RP is how we calculate our planning reserves. Before, we would take kind of maximum projection capacity and simply do a 15% planning reserve margin. We're no longer doing that anymore. We're taking the ELCC, but what we do now is we're looking at a reliability metric, and then from there calculate how many planning reserves we need in order to meet the reliability metric. So currently right now we're using a 0.2 LOLE or 2 loss of load events in every 10 years. And we're using that metric from now until 2029. And in order for EP to achieve just having 2 loss of load events within a 10-year period, it was calculated that we needed 10.1% planning reserve margins. So starting 2030 forward, we plan to phase of what we think will be an industry standard of a 0.1 LOLE or 1 event every 10 years or 1 loss of load event every 10 years. And in order to achieve that, then we'll need 12.9% planning reserve margins.
So do you know how that compares to how other utilities across WEC are calculating those same concepts?
Yeah, so I know recently there's been a lot of talk, kind of like the Western markets development, and there's been a lot of talks, a lot of utilities been meeting together, and E3 has been also kind of involved in a lot of those. So we do feel that 0.1 loss of load or 0.1 LOLE reliability metric is what we feel. I think that's what the industry standard might go into.
Yeah, so is EPE a member of some of those formal regional plans?
Right now, we're just listening in and just trying to get enough information and see what we think is best for our customers.
Are you concerned by the fact that you have this negative margin compared to both demand and reserve for this summer?
I do. So remember I mentioned this is based off of a planning reserve kind of lens. Right now, we'll talk a little bit about how we measure resource adequacy on a year basis, and we'll see that it's actually not that bad. So, but on a planning reserve, which is what we need to do, yes, right now we do show negatives but yeah, again, Jesse will probably talk a little bit more about the summer of how we're going to manage that in the summer.
Yeah, currently we don't have modeled any short-term or spot purchases as well, which would be a useful tool to be able to cover any deficiencies that we might have.
Next slide, please.
And just with respect to Western markets, you know, we've joined the EIM. And we're in the parallel operations aspect right now. In April, we will have fully join the EIM.
When did you join EIM?
So expect to go live is April 5th
April 5th.
of this year.
Oh, that's good. That's very good.
So the next question asks is how's EP, what resource will EP use to help meet the summer and winter demand from 23 to 25? So here we identified in essence 5 major resources, which is solar, gas, nuclear, purchase power, and battery. So you can see that gas, nuclear, and battery, we plan to use all of them to help us meet both the summer and winter demands. In the solar, you'll notice that it's only in the summer, and it's simply because of Paso Electric. In the winter, we peak at night when solar, obviously there'll be no solar generation at that moment, so we're not able to use that. But we do have enough resources in winter. So again, we peak in the summer, so our loads are relatively low in the winter, so we have more than enough to cover that. And purchase power, you'll notice in order to meet planning reserve basis, we could expect purchase power for years 23 and 24, but in 25, board will be surplus and will actually be sitting at a pretty decent position. Next slide, please.
I have a quick question.
Yes, please.
On the you said that in the winter you peak at night. Is that are you referring to the true peak, or is that like a net peak netting out solar?
It'd be a true peak.
Okay.
Right now we do peak in the evening and during the winter. So it's usually hours ending 19 or so, 19
Yeah,
and 20.
19 or 20.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So the next slide asks is just talks about the question, can provide monthly reserve margins for the next 3 years. So here's what I do want to talk about, how we're sitting for 23. So since we are in the current year, we're no longer using the same criteria we use for planning reserve. We're actually looking at it more on an operational basis. So we're not reducing the forced outage rate because we know, we have shorter foresight. So we know what availables we have online. So if we know there was a resource that would not be available, we would just simply reduce it. So right now for the summer, we're looking at the actual maximum capacity projection. And as far as reserves, we're not applying the 10.1 planning reserve margin, because again, that's more based off of a planning, that reliability metrics was again 2 out of every 10 years. For this year, we're looking at the current year. So we're only carrying 7% contingency reserves. And again, El Paso Electric does belong to the Southwest Reserve Sharing Group. And it's approximately about the amount of reserves that needed to be shared, or needed to be carried by El Paso Electric. So with that being said, I know on the other side, we show deficiency, but now using the new metrics that we have, we actually don't show, we actually show a surplus in June with that one. I do want to mention that the planning, the LNRs that we showed earlier did not include Newman 1, Rio 6, and Rio 7. Those have been removed on a planning basis. So we are carrying those units and we have them on reserves. So in case something happens, we can call on them this year.
Are they retired or
Those are
what is their status?
I'm sorry, those are the ones I mentioned that we planned for abandonment proceedings. So Rio 6 it has actually gone through most of the process and has been approved for abandonment after this summer. And we had held that unit in contingency for summer peak, just in case, the past couple of summers, but we won't have it for this summer. Rio Grande Unit 7 and Newman Unit 1 will be contingencies for this summer, but they won't be in the planning resource stack for meeting our summer load, but they are available to us on a contingent basis.
Yeah, those have met its useful life. So in the integrated resource plan, we did identify an extension on one of our units. So we ended up extending Newman 2 from 22 to 27. But the other units, when we examined, because during our IRP process, we do look at extension as well. We have a company, Burns McDonnell, is one of our consultants that in essence helps us develop what the cost to extend some of these units. Those were modeled in the IRP and they were not economic to do so. So we didn't. As of right now, we just have them. They've been, again, on a planning basis, they've been retired since December, but obviously meeting our load is the most important part. So we were having them as kind of an inactive reserve somewhat on contingency base in case needed in the summer. Okay, so again, these are just all the margins you'll see for this year. We're good. Now 24 to 25, we put back our kind of planning reserve glasses. So looking at it now through planning reserve criteria. So now we do see a deficiency in 2024, 135, but starting 25 forward, assuming all these resources get approved and everything goes well, we should be fine from 25 through 2029. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this one is, next one talks a question as far as where we're at, as far as updates on our most recent RFPs. So the first four that you see there with the Buena Vistas and the Hecate projects, those were actually resource selected. So the Buena Vista one and Hecate one were based off the 2017 all source RFP. And Buena Vista 2 and Hecate 2 were actually from our 2019 New Mexico RPS RFP. So right now, those four projects are currently, in front of the commission for approval. There's been some amendments that we're asking for approval for. So currently they are there. I do want to mention earlier that the LNR that we showed earlier, even with those deficiencies, is actually having all these, is assuming that these projects or these amendments will be approved. So I just want to point that out there.
And let me just give a little more background.
Please.
All of these proceedings are completed. Hearings and everything in these proceedings. The bottom one there is our RPS, our most recent RPS proceeding. And so we talked about system resources and dedicated resources for New Mexico. So Buena Vista 1, the larger solar, Buena Vista 1 and Hecate 1 are system resources. So New Mexico gets approximately 20% of those resources on an energy basis. The other three, Buena Vista 2, Hecate 2, and Carne are all RPS resources specifically for New Mexico. And so you can see that split of resources and our resource planning, how we've split those up. And the three for RPS purposes all went through the RPS proceeding and a dedicated RFP just for that, 2 dedicated RFPs just for those. And the other was done through a different RFP and got and were put up for commission approval to the LTPPA process. We have no ongoing
Yes, sir.
RFPs for New Mexico resources or any resource.
Correct. So with that, I'll pass it over to Jesse. He'll talk about the last couple of slides and how we're able to meet 23, 24, and 25.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesse Gonzalez. I'm the manager of energy resources for El Paso Electric. So basically the merchant function and also responsible for all the natural gas for fuel procurement for our natural gas fired generation.
Next slide.
I think slide 7.
Oh, I apologize. I forgot about this. So this is just a kind of a graphical representation of what the previous slide had. It's just kind of showing where the projects were expected to be COD. The next slide.
Yes, slide 8.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, so basically the following 2 slides are really just to address question 6, which basically was requesting EP's generation stack relative to its peak summer loads. We provided 2023 through 2025, juxtaposing the both years just for comparative reasons, but most of my comments will be focused on 2023. As Victor and Jim have alluded to, for 2023 specifically, we're using a reserve margin of 7% or operating reserve margin. Also, as we've alluded to, what's not modeled is we do have approximately about 162 megawatts of contingency generation resources that are still available to us. Also, these capacity tables did not include any potential short-term purchases that might be afforded to us to meet our peak demand. But as you can see on this particular slide, with respect to 2023, we have a long position of 39 megawatts, I believe there. So we feel for 2023 that we're well positioned to meet our summer peak loads. Next slide. And slide 9 is really the hypothetical, which is basically the deduction of EP's largest natural gas fired generation, which is would be subtracting out 228 megawatts. Basically the same operating parameters as the previous slide. In this particular line item number 9, margin over reserve, we do show a deficiency of 189 megawatts. Not taking into account those contingency resources are about 162 megawatts, give or take. So the delta of 27 megawatts would more than likely be met with purchase power in the open market to fulfill those needs. And as Jim kind of alluded to in his opening remarks, with respect to severe contingencies, given EP's geographical footprint relative to Palo Verde or remote generation resources, we do feel that transmission or the lack of transmission availability might be more of a severe contingency, than the loss of local gas-fired generation. So that's just kind of as a side note, but a note to take into account. And that basically concludes what we had presented. If you have any additional questions or points of clarification that are necessary.
Commissioner Aguilar, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I guess I just want to go back slightly to something you said on this slide. So you said for 2024, you would be sort of fulfilling your needs through market purchases. Can you elaborate on that? Are those, will you be securing capacity for that? Or are you referencing like real-time purchases?
Yeah, so specifically, I guess the comment was with respect to 2023 in particular, but yes, we would expect the dispatch of any contingency resources that we may have available, which equate to about 162 megawatts that we have available that are not displayed on the chart here on the table, if you will. So with that, we would expect a difference of about a shortfall of about 27 megawatts for 2023, which we would expect to fulfill with purchase power, short-term purchase power contracts or energy in the real-time market.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, obviously with the EIM, you could purchase, the same day, but you would have to hope that the energy were available. With the other market purchases you're referring to, wouldn't you have to have some sort of arrangement set up in advance to allow those purchases to happen?
Right. So with respect to the EIM, we would expect that market is mainly a energy imbalance market or not necessarily resource adequacy. So we would still be engaging in quite a few day ahead bilateral contracts or bilateral purchases to ensure that we have enough resources to go into the market, given the fact that that's kind of one of the mandates is that you're not supposed to be really leaning on your neighbors per se. It's really to address imbalances with respect to intermittent renewable resources or load forecaster or something to that effect. So we would still expect to engage in these bilateral contracts and purchases well in advance of the operating hour.
Yeah. We may be required, like you said, there's got to be some type of arrangement. And I think in order to secure that purchase, we may need to engage in a capacity purchase for about a month or two. If we do see ourselves being in this situation, I think in order for us to be able to assure that we'll have that capacity there when needed, we may need to be required to do a capacity purchase, but we'll be evaluated once we get closer if we're in this scenario.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So just to follow up on that, then how will the EIM affect your SRSG commitments?
We still have as a balancing authority that overall responsibility of reliability and super. So we would expect to still have that set aside or those contingent reserves that we need to fulfill as part of the SRSG membership group. So we would still expect to fulfill all of those responsibilities. So the EIM wouldn't absolve us, I guess, from those responsibilities.
I guess my question is really which dispatches first?
So we would have like balance schedules prior to those operating hours. Then after that is when we expect the EIM to be able to handle any imbalances that are necessary. Yeah. So we would be balanced. We would expect to be balanced where resources, our generation resources meet our projected load prior to the operating hour.
Yeah, you're going into the hour with a balance.
Right.
If you have a forced outage.
Right.
And then you need to make up that imbalance because of that forced outage. Does SRSG kick in first or then EIM?
Yeah, so so it might be a timing issue, right? So the SRC or interchange would come into the system, and the EIM would be, we would need to account for that interchange that came into the system to make sure that we're not counteracting any market remedies, if you will.
I guess what I'm hearing is SRSG will work and then EIM cleans up after
Right.
SRSG's done. Okay.
You're welcome.
Can I just want to drill down a little bit more into this. So you said you still have some contingency reserves available to you. Is that, I may have misunderstood it, but it sounded sort of like hedging a little bit. Like, is that are those your resources, or is that a contract that you have?
No, those are EPE owned resources.
Okay. Thank you. And then in terms of the bilateral contracts, short-term contracts that you would enter into for this summer, when would you make the decision as to whether you need to enter into those contracts?
Yeah, generally speaking, we look at least a 3-month or a 4-month look ahead timeframe potentially. Really, it is really contingent on what our generation fleet is looking like. If we have any forced outages, any derates, et cetera. Sometimes we previously we could procure specifically for super peak hours, which might be hour ending 13 through hour ending 20, or definitive 8 hours when we would actually experience some of these peaks instead of around the clock. But yeah, those would be generally the lead times depending on market liquidity.
Okay, so that it seems like maybe maybe around now is the time then, if I understood it correctly, because it looked like maybe like in June is when there
Right.
would be, yeah, okay.
Any more questions? Thank you, gentlemen. Very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the long drive up to Santa Fe too, man. Yes. Hopefully Jim buys you a good dinner.
I've been able to do
Chairman, are you ready for us? Do you want a break or anything?
People want to break into this vital reason.
Chairman, your mic is not on. I can't hear what you're saying.
I only turn it on when I'm not talking. Sorry, I was just taking a poll of the room. Do we need a bio break? We've been at it for an hour and a half now, but I think consensus is that let's keep going. Take it away.
Chairman, Commissioners, again, I'm Mark Fenton, Executive Director of Regulatory Policy and Case Management at PNM. And with me, I've got Nick Phillips at the table, our Director of Integrated Resource Planning, as well as Brett Heffington, our Managing Generation Director. I'd like to say a couple things. Hopefully everybody's got our exhibits. We listed them as Exhibit A and B to our February 28th filing. I provided handouts and I sent them yesterday to, I think Patrick Rodriguez has them, as well as I handed them to the commissioners and Miss Amer and Troy Curry. So hopefully everybody's got a copy. If you don't, we have extras. Those were, it says Exhibit A and B. Exhibit A was our written presentation and Exhibit B is the PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go over today. Before we launch into the presentation, I'd just like to make a couple of remarks that I think might be interesting besides the presentation. Most of you probably are aware that, PNM from a media and commission perspective, our resource adequacy has been under quite a bit of scrutiny. It's been in the newspaper in 2022 as we were shutting down San Juan, and then we extended San Juan to October. And there was a lot of questions about PNM's resource adequacy. So along with that, there was a significant amount of commission requirements on reporting. We had Ms. Amer went over it a couple of weeks ago at a commission open meeting where we had monthly meeting related to our San Juan replacement resources. We had bi-monthly meetings or bi-monthly reporting related to Palo Verde. We've been filing that for quite some time. That was all consolidated at the open meeting about, I guess, 2-3 weeks ago. And we appreciate that. Our next update was going to be at the end of March. But I just wanted to alert you that we went ahead and made a filing at the end of February with respect to 2023 primarily. We made that filing in the 19-00195 case, the 20-00182 case, the 21-00215 case. And that filing really went over what the status of our replacement resources were, both with respect to Palo Verde and the San Juan replacement resources. It went over what the reserve margin was. It also provided an update of the latest purchase agreements we had entered into. It identified 4 purchase agreements totaling about 150 megawatts that we entered into for 2023. It showed that our total that we've procured for the summer of 2023 is about 460 megawatts, I believe. Nick's going to go through some of that in detail, but I just wanted you to be aware as you go through these slides, there's actually a pleading that provides the latest for PNM for 2023. So that's in the docket I mentioned. The other thing I'd like to say before we start the presentation is as part of that scrutiny, originally the commission ordered us to conduct biweekly meetings with our stakeholders, which includes staff and all the stakeholders to the San Juan case, the San Juan replacement resource case, which was about 23 or 24 interveners. We've been holding those biweekly meetings. We've held 26 of them. So it's essentially for 2 years, we've been holding those meetings. It's not required anymore, but we found it very valuable. And I think the stakeholders have found it very valuable. It turned out to be a really good thing where we have a dialogue and we talk about 2023, we talk about 2024 and 5. So we're continuing to do that. And as I said, staff's been attending those meetings as well. So it's been an opportunity for the stakeholders to really stay up to speed on where we are in resource adequacy. So I just wanted to make those remarks. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nick for the formal presentation.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity. So we'll go through the presentation materials. I'm going to try to hit the key points to make sure we address each of your questions. If you have any questions, of course, please ask along the way. I know this is supposed to be more of a dialogue and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. So if we can go to our presentation materials, and I would like the presentation maybe to jump actually straight to page 4, which is the L&R table for annually from 2023 through 2032. And looking at this table, what we have here is a presentation, and similar to the previous utilities, we're showing on a on-force capacity and ELCC basis how our resources stack up against our load net of forecasted energy efficiency and behind the meter photovoltaic additions over time. Some of the key takeaways for this information, and for 2023, we're currently sitting about 11.2% planning reserve margin. That's 233 megawatts above what our forecasted load is, net of the energy efficiency and behind the meter photovoltaic additions. That includes right now, as Mark mentioned, 460 megawatts of forward firm purchases to help us with our resource adequacy position for summer of 2023. Due to delays in resources coming online associated with the San Juan retirement, we did have to go out and enter into these forward transactions to make sure we'd be able to reliably serve our customers. We believe that this puts us in a good position relative to our resource mix and our projected loads to make sure we can serve our customers reliably. But we are going to continue to monitor the forward markets as well as the day ahead real-time markets to add any additional link depending on what the actual operations that are occurring. We've heard from other folks as we move into the actual operating year. We shift from a planning reserve margin requirement to operating reserves. And so we need to make sure that we carry the correct operating reserves. And as we enter the operational hours, we'll assess our resource stack. If there's any outages or things we need to take into account, we'll hit the markets again to make sure that we can cover those requirements. Looking a little bit further down the road, when we get into 2024, our planning reserve margin jumps up to 13.4% or 280 megawatts above what our projected peak demand is net of our energy efficiency and behind the meter photovoltaic additions. This is due to the additions of additional solar and battery storage resources that will come online in early 2024. So as we go into 2023, later this spring, we'll have the Arroyo project battery come online 150 megawatts, and shortly thereafter the solar will start to come online, as well as the Jicarilla project will be coming online. It's 20 megawatt battery and 50 megawatts of solar. Those are part of the San Juan replacement resources, but some of the other parts of the San Juan replacement resources will not be online yet. Those will start to phase in 2024. The San Juan Solar 1 project will come online in early 2024. That's 100 megawatt battery and 200 megawatt solar, as well as the Atrisco project, which has been amended to be a 300 megawatt solar, 300 megawatt battery project. So with all of those additions, we will be at a 13.4% planning reserve margin based on our current load forecast before we enter into any additional market purchases. So we'll be assessing our position relative to that 13.4% number. If we need to probe the market to see if there's any additional forward firm purchases to enter into, as well as look at the day ahead real-time markets again to make sure that we're best balancing our customers' reliable service with cost. There's no additional resources projected to come online between 24 and 25. So the change in our planning reserve margin dropping from 13.4% to 11.1% is a reflection of the additional load increases going from 2024 to 2025 with no additional resources coming on. Again, there's no long-term forward purchases that we're accounting for in 2025, but we will continue to monitor the markets as well to see if there's any additional firm purchases we would need to enter into either year ahead, month ahead, or day ahead, depending on how the situation evolves.
Do you mind going over the San Juan replacement resources timeline again?
Sure.
Focusing on this year.
Sure. So as of right now, none of the San Juan replacement resources are online. There was 4 projects that were approved. The first one is the Arroyo project that, as approved, was a 300 megawatt solar 150 megawatt 4-hour energy storage resource. Later this spring, likely in May, the 150 megawatt battery will be coming online. The developer has given us notice that the solar is going to be a little bit further delayed. So I believe it's in June. We expect the first 70 megawatts of solar to come on. Then by the end of August, the second 70 megawatts of solar to come on. And then the balance of the 160 megawatts of solar will be online by the end of the year. The Jicarilla project was a 50 megawatt project, solar, 20 megawatt 4-hour storage. And we expect that to be online in May, both the solar and battery components. Those are the only 2 San Juan replacement resources that were approved that will be online this year. We have filed an amendment for the San Juan solar project. That's a 200 megawatt solar, 100 megawatt 4-hour energy storage project. We expect that to be online in May of 2024. On January 20th of this year, we filed a notice of contractual termination with the Rockmont project. That was originally a 100 megawatt solar, 30 megawatt 4-hour storage project. That will no longer be coming online at all. Those were the 4 San Juan replacement projects. Then there was 3 projects that were part of our Palo Verde filing. The Atrisco project was a 300 megawatt solar, 150 megawatt 4-hour storage project that has since been amended to be a 300 megawatt solar, 300 megawatt energy storage project. And that is slated to come online in May of 2024 as well. The other 2 projects associated with our Palo Verde filing, one was a 100 megawatt 2-hour energy storage project called Sandia Peak. The other was the Jicarilla Energy Center, which was a 150 megawatt solar, 40 megawatt energy storage project. Both of those projects have also been sent formal notices of contractual cancellation.
Commissioner Ellison, those details are in that filing I mentioned, that February 28th filing. All those details are in there as well.
Back to the LNR table, just reiterating that right now that this does not show any short-term purchases. So everything we have right now here is either resources that we own or have long-term contracts for firm deliveries for each of these resources. And then we'll again play in the market. I shouldn't say play, but monitor the markets and make sure that we are adding additional length as we get to the operating hours, either in the day ahead or real-time markets. Primarily, that would be bilateral markets at first. We are a member of the EIM, and we did hear El Paso talk about their participation. In order to participate intra-hour, we'll have to pass resource sufficiency tests prior to entering that hour. So we can't lean on the EIM for resource adequacy, but because we can show resource adequacy ahead of time, we can then provide cost savings to our customers on an energy basis by participating in that market. Another quick note I would make is keeping in mind, and this is also piggybacking on what SPS and EPE have talked about, is these are ELCC values in for our renewable and energy limited resources in this LNR table, and showing on a planning reserve margin basis. It's all tied to loss of load probability metrics. And that's really the best way to think about this, because as the system's risk hours change over time, the accreditations for resources, essentially their ELCCs, will change over time. And this can lead to changes in also planning reserve margin requirements. So we have to tie them all together. We can't think about any one of them in isolation. If we want to go ahead then to the next slide. Here we are showing the anticipated resources on a stacked bar graph on how we would serve our customers in the summers and winters of 2023 through 2025. I think one of the key takeaways that I would point out here is we are showing now, when we're stacking these up, ICAP numbers or installed capacity instead of on-force capacity for the thermal resources, but we're still showing effective load carrying capabilities for the energy limited renewable resources. The reason for this is to make sure that when we're thinking about the actual load that we're serving, we don't need to derate our thermal fleet for a forced outage rate. That is simply a planning convention to determine an effective planning reserve margin. When we're actually getting into the operational, we will have the resources and they'll be operating either at their capacity or derated capacity or not operating at all. But we need to reflect that we should have up to their full capacities in order to meet our loads. Another key point I would draw out here is that if we look at the winter plots, those are on the right-hand side, similar to what EPE had represented. Our gross peak load, when I say gross peak, though, I do mean net of energy efficiency and net of behind the meter photovoltaics, will occur in an hour after the sun has gone down. So even though we would report an effective load carrying capability for our risk hours, which are concentrated in the summer currently for our solar resources, they will not provide us load carrying capability in the winter. And that's an example of the dynamics of the system. And as the system changes over time, winter will become more and more difficult to serve. If we think about a carbon-free system way down the road, the biggest constraints are going to be limited charging hours for your storage resources when you've got shorter daylight. So winter will become more and more important. It's not as critical yet, but it's something we have to keep thinking about.
Currently, your ELCC calculations then are geared towards looking at your need to meet peak capacity in the summer.
Mainly need to meet net peak capacity in the summer, and we'll get to your hypothetical. If you happen to have our write-up in front of you, if you were to turn to page 6 of 14, there's a heat map there. That heat map, the simplest way to think about, in my mind, the simplest way to think about the ELCCs is a weighted average contribution to meeting capacity of load during those risk hours. And so this is a table representing our 2025 year. So if we think about this, the solar resources, for example, you could think about, well, what's the weighted average solar output during that relative risk hours in the heat map there. And that will change over the time. And there's lots of reasons that could change over time, right? And things that are beyond the utility's control. Think about, for example, if we had a lot of new customers come on and every single one of our new customers has behind the meter solar photovoltaic generation. That will cause what our load that we see at the meter shift out later and later in the day, even though that the magnitude of that load may not change. And it could cause the resource accreditations for the rest of the resources on our systems to drop.
have a question here.
Yes, sir.
Can you define the market purchases? Are these like short-term bilateral contracts, or are these and have they already been made? Like, do you already have a contract, or are you going to enter into a contract?
Yes, sir. If we could turn to slide 10, please. So that 460 megawatts is short-term firm contracts that we have already executed, entered into for firm deliveries during the summer of 2023. You can see on this slide that we have, let me count them up. I should have done this ahead of time. 13 individual contracts with multiple different counterparties, and they were all executed into at different points in time, trying to manage forward price risk along with trying to make sure that we have sufficient resources to serve our customers. But each one of these is a contract that has already been executed for firm delivery to our system.
Got it. Thanks.
And I'll come back to this slide in a second. We can go over those in more detail, but wanted to make sure that we addressed your question right now. So, we do believe we are in good position to serve our customers both in the summer and winter peaks of 2023, 2024, and 2025. You can see the resources that we'll be using to serve our customers will shift. We have a block of 460 megawatts in 2023 that's related to those purchases that the commissioner just asked about. We don't have any long-term purchases, or I should say long ahead purchases entered into for 2024, 2025, but we do reflect the additional solar and storage resources that are expected to be online by summer of 2024, looking at our storage portfolio growing from 170 megawatts to 620 megawatts. The rest of the fossil fleet and nuclear fleet is remaining the same, as well as the wind. If we want to move forward, then one more slide to slide 6. I guess up on the screen, back to slide 6. Here we can see the reserve margins month by month. I think most of the information was well captured on the previous slide, so I don't want to spend too much time here to save more time for some of the subsequent slides. But similar to the other utilities, the main risk right now for us still remains in the summer. We do have some higher loads in the winter, and we expect to see risk continue to grow in the winter as our portfolio evolves, as well as if there's more environmental regulations that are passed, such as requirements for building electrification and transportation electrification that will add more load to the system. But as right now, the summer remains the primary focus for PNM, and we are well positioned in the shoulder months. If we can move to slide 9, please. So for a brief update on RFPs, we did have a number of RFPs, both on the firm physical resource side as well as the wholesale side, that could have led to resources for delivery in 2023, 2024, and 2025. The first RFP was our 2021 RFP, or also known as the Four Corners Replacements RFP. The abandonment was not approved, and so there was no filing made for resources coming out of that RFP. We did have another resource RFP for physical resources. It was titled the 2023 and 2024 RFP. After our evaluation, the bid submitted in there we did not believe had the ability to deliver in time, so no resources were selected from those RFPs or filed with the commission. We've done 3 separate wholesale RFPs. One in May 26 of 2022, which resulted in a selection of 125 megawatts of firm forward purchases. An October 28th wholesale RFP of 2022, which resulted in the selection of 110 megawatts of firm forward purchases. And recently this year, the January 30th, 2023 RFP, which resulted in 150 megawatts of firm forward purchases. We also purchased 75 megawatts in firm forward purchases on the bilateral market. We do have a couple other projects, as noted, that are related to adding some energy storage devices to the distribution system that we're anticipating coming up for 10 megawatts in 2024 and 25 megawatts in 2025. And that's effective capacity, but those have not yet been brought to the commission. Now back to the, Back to the breakdown of the wholesale market purchases for 2023 delivery. We have each of the individual contracts here listed. We've removed the pricing and counterparty names. I guess I would throw back to the commission. Is there anything in particular here you'd like to know about any of these contracts, or is knowing that they've already been entered into and we have a diverse portfolio of counterparties and delivery points sufficient?
Yeah, the only question I had, and it came up at our open meeting that spawned this meeting, is just making sure that Palo Verde 3 EPE isn't also a resource that EPE is looking to use in the summer.
No, sir. That was offered up by EPE in an RFP that PNM bid into. So that has been, and I believe that is their deregulated portion of Palo Verde 3, or what's not included in their rate base.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
The primary driver for needing these market purchases is because of the delays associated with the San Juan replacement.
Yes, sir. That's correct. All of the San Juan resources were expected to be on originally in 2022, and through the delays associated with the COVID pandemic, supply chains, and many other things, none of those contracts delivered. And that's been a phenomenon that many utilities have been seeing across the country, and we've had to take these actions in order to serve our customers. The next set of slides I have are going to then get into the hypothetical question, which I'll give a little bit of a take on how PNM interpreted this. So the hypothetical was, address a hypothetical scenario, project a summer peak load using a theoretical peak day and a theoretical peak hour that we deem appropriate, and let's take a good hard look at that. And PNM want to take this as an opportunity to really focus in on, well, what's really driving the overall risk on our system, and is it peak load or is it not? And so this first slide that I have up, if we go to slide 11, what I really want to show you is, no longer is peak load really driving the risk of the system. We all like to think about planning reserve margin and things relative to our peak load, but at least for PNM, and we're pretty far along, or will be in the overall energy transition. To give some ideas, we're roughly a 2,100 megawatt system in terms of peak load. And I know I just said don't think about that much, but by the time we get to 2025, we're expecting to have about 1,500 megawatts of solar, 600 megawatts of wind, and almost 700 megawatts of energy storage. So that presents a very interesting dynamic to the system. And this slide here is showing, well, if we take a look at those risk hours, what we had in that heat map, well, how does that line up against gross load on the left-hand side? Well, hardly any risk in the gross load hours. But if we take a look at high net load hours on the right hand side, that plot shows there's a lot of risk on the right hand side associated with those net load hours. And so when we start thinking about the system going forward, we need to really be thinking about where is the risk manifesting and how are we going to best design a system to meet where our risk occurs, not just the peak load.
Could you help me with what you mean by a lot of risk? Because I'm seeing 80 megawatts.
Yeah, so this is expected energy not served. And so when we're thinking about how we run our loss of load modeling, this is saying, if we look at the single hour where we had load shed occur, that's corresponding with this high net load hour. In one of those simulations, we might have had 80 megawatts not served, or another simulation, you look at a different dot, it would have been 55 megawatts of load not served. So relative to our 2,100 megawatt system, it's not a huge amount of load, but it still is the risk of load not being served, and we want to make sure that we are able to serve our customers.
You were talking more about frequency than magnitude?
Well, loss of load expectation, yes, is a measure of frequency. It's talking about events. This was pulling out, trying to show the relative magnitude. So what I guess I would say is consider this as, there's 1 hour here with high net load where there is a higher relative risk, but overall, if we compare the plot on the right to the plot on the left, there is risk associated with the loads on the right, the high net loads. There is very little, if any, risk associated with the gross loads on the left-hand side.
Thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
Could you describe the modeling technique that you use to generate this information, and what sort of renewable data was used?
Sure. So we use a model called SERVM, the Strategic Energy Evaluation and Risk Model, licensed by Astrape Consulting. We've got 42 different historic weather years of weather data. And then each one of those weather years is sampled as we move forward in time, and it does actually a 5-minute dispatch simulation with imperfect foresight to make sure that we're not over accrediting what our operators are going to be able to do. There's never perfect knowledge going on. And so in each weather year, it takes the expected loads that we put in, you can call it the expected loads that we put in, a P50 value or a normal value. And if the weather year that it samples from is a more extreme weather year, we adjust the load patterns to align with the weather from that weather year. So it could be adjusted up, it could be adjusted down. And then when it samples the individual days or individual hours, it will also pull renewable data, uses the NREL database for solar irradiance for our solar production profiles. And we use some historic wind data for our wind profiles, and aligns the renewable productions on that weather year with the sampled load data from that weather year after the load's adjusted. So we get a historic sampling that's correlated together to make sure the renewable generation aligns with the load patterns. And so it runs forward in time. It also does stochastics against the generator forced outage rates as well. And we do that for all 40 weather years or 42 weather years, as well as on the generator outage side and some other load forecast uncertainty. And so we come up with roughly 256, I believe, simulations that are put together to come up with the heat map that you saw earlier to take a look at what our overall risk is. And that's for the representation for a single calendar year of expected values of production costs.
Thank you.
So if we move forward to the next slide, then page 12, this gets into how we're going to look at the the difference between gross load and net load. So if we look at the hypothetical peak load hour on the left-hand side, and this is for gross load, net of energy efficiency and the behind the meter photovoltaic, what we can see here is even though the load there, and that's the expected value across the 42 weather years, I'm going to ignore the generator outages at this point. That total load of 2,158 megawatts, if we take and align that with the renewable production across those 42 weather years during the peak load hour, we are going to expect to be able to serve more than 50% of that with our renewable resources that are expected to be on at that point in time, leaving less than 1,000 megawatts to be served by our gas and storage fleet and nuclear. That's a much easier thought of having to serve that, even if you have one or more generator outages. And so if you follow over to the right-hand side, the resource stack on the left-hand side, we can show in the right-hand side is with and without the outages that you had asked for. And that lower blue line corresponds to what our dispatchable fleet would have to serve after the renewable production. Now, it's a much different story if we think about the P50 weather on the net peak hour. That's the middle bar there with a lot of blue and very little green. Even though the peak load of that day, or I'm sorry, the total load in that hour is only 1,904 megawatts, much less than the bar on the left. We're only counting on 70 megawatts being served by renewables, and the rest has to be made up for by the dispatchable fleet. And the main reason being, instead of thinking about this in being hours 15, 16, or 17, as on the left-hand side, that right-hand side load bar is hours 18, 19, and 20. So we've seen a significant fall off in solar output. In that set of simulations, there would be low wind production. And so then we follow that blue bar across the right, we're digging into our thermal and storage fleet pretty heavily. And if there's a generator outage for our largest gas plant, we're still in position to serve our load, but we're starting getting much closer. So, that's the main difference between when we're thinking about gross load, where there's not as much risk, versus net load, where there is. If we go to the next slide, this is, instead of looking at the expected value of those high load hours, well, what if we look at the single most extreme case, the single worst weather year that we have in terms of producing high gross and high net loads in the summer? That in effect was actually our 1980 weather year. The left-hand plot was hour ending 17, where the right-hand plot is hour ending 20. So a difference of 3 hours. You can see there on the left-hand side, the total peak load was 2,331 megawatts. That's almost 200 megawatts above what our P50 value is. So it's a pretty extreme case, but this is the type of information that's captured in our risk modeling. And we can still see there that roughly 50% of it or more can be served by our renewable resources in that gross load hour. But when we look over to that net load hour on the right, only 100 megawatts of renewables are producing, and the rest of it has to be made up for by our thermal and storage fleet. If we compare the resource stacks on the right-hand side, again, no problems in the gross load hour, and with no outages, there shouldn't be any issues in the high net load hour. Now, where we're currently sitting today, if we had a failure of our single largest gas unit during that time, it could present a shortfall that would have to be made up for in the real-time or day-ahead markets, or we're going to have to take additional time to add more resources to our system. Again, that's the most extreme weather year and most extreme hour in our risk model. Those are the things that are captured, but certainly the type of information that we need to be looking at when we're thinking about how do we reliably serve our customers going forward. So that's the end of the presentation materials that we prepared. I'd certainly welcome any additional questions or follow-ups or the opportunity to come back and talk of this for a lot longer time.
Yeah, thanks for that offer. Commissioner Aguilar, do you have any questions?
No, I think I already asked the question I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions, Commissioner?
I guess just to follow up on these, the 2025 charts here, did you use, I guess, production cost modeling to, to look at these particular scenarios, these particular hours that you've talked about here?
Yes, this is from the same 8760, and I hesitate to even say 8760 because this model actually does dispatch at a 5-minute increment, but it's a calendar year dispatch over those multiple weather years and other stochastic iterations that produce the same heat map that we were talking about. We went to that data, looked at the individual time periods where the P50 gross peak and extreme gross peak, and then the P50 net peak and extreme net peak occurred, and pulled the results of the renewable dispatch out of that and presented that here. On the right-hand side, when we're looking at the resource stack for our fleet, that is the ICAP number. So we're not showing exactly what was dispatched there, but saying here's the capacity position that would be left over for our thermal and our storage fleet in order to meet that net load.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So just kind of circling back to a question I had for El Paso, I know PNM's a member of that Western Market Exploratory Group, WMIG.
Mm-hmm.
In that group, is there any work on resource adequacy or how to look at ELCC and planning reserve margins?
So I'm actually chairing the resource adequacy subcommittee in WMIG. That group has actually stalled a little bit because there was too much of I'll say impasse between whether the direction of the markets committee and WMIG wanted to consider a full resource adequacy construct, or whether that was just supposed to be something, for example, that should we require market participants to take part in RAP. So it never got to the point, should there be a unified way of looking at ELCC or other such things. But in most of the discussions, the utilities are all saying we should be moving towards that metric and that way of looking at things. In terms of how it might be further explored through WMIG, it's just going to have to be a continuing process.
No, thanks. Because all I've seen on WMIG is press releases, and I haven't seen any output. Yeah. So I was wondering, should we expect anything from them? Or, I mean, how's WMIG governed? Is there anybody that's not a utility involved in that?
I don't know outside of the resource adequacy group. I have not sat on many of the full market meetings, but most of the folks that I've been interacting with are on the utility side.
Okay. And then is P&M going to join the RAP?
We are currently discussing membership with RAP. We haven't made a conclusive decision, but we are in discussions with them and exploring if or when the right time would be.
Yeah, and I was actually going to talk to Mr. Rilkoff about that because I know our membership in RAP impacts commission participation, I think. I understand within the next month or so, we are going to commit to that. So that was the latest thing I heard yesterday.
I apologize. I didn't know if I was allowed to say that.
Okay. I was told I could yesterday. So
It just might.
It may not be exactly a month, but
just 2 cents. WMIG is not transparent. Kind of looks like a star chamber. RAP has a governance board that includes people that aren't utilities. So more transparency and hopefully a more robust discussion of how to go forward that involves stakeholders. So I appreciate the update on WMIG because all I've seen, like I say, is press releases and zero output. So I was wondering if we should expect anything from them or not. And I guess what I'm hearing is not.
Not anytime soon.
Yeah.
This is not exactly a resource adequacy question, but just noting that in a couple of years with how much solar P&M will have on the system and the possibility of having excess solar at times, and I guess with El Paso Electric not having that much solar right now, have you considered some sort of a bilateral contract, or would you intend to sell into the EIM, or I'm just curious about your thinking on that.
It's certainly something that we're still having to continue to think about, whether there's the ability to sell through bilateral agreements, what the EIM may bear, what could be put into the storage devices and reused for the system later. And in terms of whether there's a economic choice between, do you need to curtail, do you need to build more transmission, do you need to build more storage? It's all being considered, but we don't have any firm answers on that.
Tom Falgren or Brent, do you have anything to add to Nick's response on that one? Tom?
I'll add just a little bit. The solar is important to us because we got to meet both our RPS standards, and then also P&M is obligated to the 400 pounds per megawatt hour constraint in the Energy Transition Act. And so those, renewable energy credits are important for us for making those guidelines or those requirements as well. So.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
I guess I'll open it up for one more round of questions, and thank you P&M and SPS and EPE. So if anybody, having listened to all this, if you got any questions for anybody, I guess now's a good time to do it.
One thing I should have mentioned at the outset is we really appreciate this workshop because there's been a lot of complex data presented today, and when you start issuing bench requests and going back and forth, it gets a little difficult for you probably, and certainly for us as well. So this workshop idea and the collaboration that it brings is really appreciated. So we appreciate you scheduling this workshop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions or desire for more. But so anyway, again, just to follow up on Mr. Fenton's statement, likewise, I appreciate the attitude everybody brought into this and the information you provided. It's funny, if you look at the 3 different stacks, each utility had a different personality in how they approached the answer, which makes sense because you're each unique. But all 3 were informative. And like I said, we're a new commission. One of the things that looked like would be helpful based on the discussion we had at our open meeting was just setting a baseline for going forward. So anyway, I feel like I've accomplished that for me. I don't know if that's helped anybody else here, but anyway, just on a personal level, I appreciate that. And I guess open it up, Commissioner Aguilera, do you have any closing remarks?
Thank you for the presentations. I thought this was very informative. It certainly helps me get up to speed, so I really appreciate that. I think you're right, Chairman, that there are 3 different personalities that we heard about, and even just looking at the resource mixes, they're quite a bit different. And so I found that interesting, given that I guess New Mexico is sort of a big state, so maybe the geography is sort of the reason for that. But I found it very interesting, so I'll do some more thinking about this. I'll follow up with any questions if I have them, but thanks again.
Let me let you close the show, Commissioner Ellison.
Again, I appreciate everyone's time and your preparation and the engagement here. I think there are a lot of moving parts. There have been a lot of changes, and I think we just want to understand, I guess, those changing positions and the thinking that you're putting into preparing for resource adequacy, and we appreciate that.
Okay, so our agenda, we have a item for public comment.
But there was, excuse me. Hans was designated as the person to accept phone calls or emails for public comment, and he said there was no one, but there may be someone here. Seeing none, it looks like we don't have any public comment.
Yeah, there certainly was a lot of comment, and again, just re-say what's already been said. Appreciate the conversation. And if this makes sense, this might be the kind of thing we can do on a more frequent basis, just to make sure that we all understand each other as we move forward. And then we're at this awkward moment where I don't know how to adjourn these meetings. I move that we adjourn.
I second.
A vote would be Commissioner O'Connell,
Aye.
Commissioner Ellison,
Aye.
Commissioner Aguilera.
Aye.
All right, so we're adjourned, and thank you all, and see you down the road.